Well, I appreciate the brief introductions that Kevin and John both gave me. I remember a number of years ago I was giving a speech, and the introducer just went on and on and on with his introduction. It's like he would never finish. And when he finally did, I got up to speak, and I said, well, you've heard of the speaker who needs no introduction. Now you've heard the introduction that needs no speaker. Actually, one of my most memorable sermon introductions, and thank you, gentlemen, for not doing this one, the song leader said, to prepare our minds for David's sermon, let's sing hymn number 354. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder how that's going to tie in. So I turned to 354, and the title pretty much said it all. Oh, the bitter pain and sorrow. One reason I mention it is I think I've said before that a young man in my youth group, when I was a youth minister early in my career, became a preacher, a very good preacher. And he's actually coached me a little bit on the series I've done the last couple of summers on Ecclesiastes and Job. He thought it was good payback. I coached him on his first sermons when he was 16, so now I need coaching in my 70s, and he provided it. So I said, so what do you think I should preach on this summer? He said, I think you should preach on Lamentations. And I thought, oh, the bitter pain and sorrow. He said, I just don't think we lament enough. And I said, well, after Job last summer, I think we better lighten up a bit. Maybe we'll revisit Lamentations another time. So instead, I want to take you on a road trip this summer. How many of you have taken a road trip this summer? Okay, well, the price of gas and I guess the traffic, I didn't see a lot of hands. The Eatons just got back from a road trip, and I asked Charlie about it, and he said, yeah, 7,500 miles for their road trip this summer. The question in my mind was why, but I didn't ask him that. But our road trip is a little different. It's through the challenges of being a Christian in the 21st century. Because if you think about it, churches are in decline, secularism and the distractions of the world are on the rise. Ours has begun to be called a post-Christian world, an after-Christian world. So this month we're going to look at some of the challenges on our road trip through the 21st century as Christians and try to understand how we might live for God in these challenging times. So we begin in Psalm 137. And in this psalm, more than 2,500 years ago, God's people are again in captivity by one of their enemies. In this case, those awful Babylonians have captured them. And they were in this Babylonian captivity for 70 years, if you could imagine. And so in Psalm 37, verses 1 and 2, the psalmist writes, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. Do any of you sit and weep about how things were so much better at some earlier time in your life? Perhaps in your youth, perhaps in your young adulthood. I certainly have been guilty of that. And of course, here we are in America's finest city. We're not in Babylonian captivity. Verse 2, there on the poplars, we hung our harps. And then those awful Babylonians in verse 3 asked us for songs. And they demanded songs, singing, sing us one of the songs of Zion. Sing us one of the songs of joy. I'm not able to get this forward. All right, there we go. I hope I didn't go too far. Our tormentors, verse 3, demanded songs of joy. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. And then the question that I want to pose for today, verse 4, Psalm 137, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? How can we sing the Lord's song amid so much secularism and division and strife and dysfunction and distractions today? How can we sing Christian songs in a post-Christian world? That's the question I want to pose for today. And I want to say that I think there are two facts that we must face, and there are two things we must do. And that'll be the focus of the sermon this morning. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Two facts we must face, two things we must do. The first fact we have to understand is that God's people have long lived in foreign lands. They have been singing the Lord's song in foreign lands in a way that's really more the norm than the exception. You may remember, no doubt, that Abraham and his descendants were trapped in Egypt. But did you know how long they were there? Genesis 15:13, God tells Abraham that his offspring will be, quote, strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40 tells us they were there for 430 years, exactly to the day. And this captivity, the Babylonian captivity, as I mentioned, was 70 years, which Jeremiah had prophesied. And then there was the Assyrian captivity. And during the period of Judges, which is not often counted as captivity, Israel would spend anywhere from 7 to 40 years under the oppression of neighboring nations because of the spiritual compromise of God's people. So he would send them into the hands and the oppression of their neighboring nations. But if you think about it, even in the New Testament times, God's people lived under the political domination of the Roman Empire. In fact, Rome dominated that region for over 150 years during the time of Jesus and the early church. Roman soldiers were walking the streets. Roman taxes were collected. Rome appointed their political leaders. Maybe you don't like some of our political leaders, but at least they are ours. They were chosen by a vote of the people. How can we sing the Lord's song under foreign rule? I had a close friend, Bill Evans, who was a psychologist, and if I would start to complain about how my life was or how something wasn't working well, he had a great quotation. He would say, "No one said it was easy being you." And so if we could apply that here, no one said it was easy being God's children. As Jesus put it, in this world, you will have trouble. John chapter 16 and verse 33. So one of the facts we have to face is that we have to quit dreaming about a world that really never was for God's people. We need to quit dreaming about a land or a time where either everyone was a Christian or Christians were widely respected and appreciated. Frankly, for God's children, that has not been the norm. That has not been the way the world has been. It's not the world that God's people inhabited historically, and it's honestly not the world that we inhabit today. So I think that's the first fact we have to face. God's children have long lived in foreign lands and have been challenged to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. And that's, in a sense, where we are today. We as Christians are living in a foreign land. The second fact that we have to face is that our relationship to this world is really that of travelers on a road trip, just passing through, just staying a short time. Thank you very much. Our problem is that we become way too attached to this world. Let me say that again. Our problem is that we become way too attached to this world. We think this is our world, but it's not. The Bible tells us over and over again, this is not our world. We are of another world, a different world. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 says we are, quote, foreigners and exiles among the pagans. You probably don't think of yourself that way, but that's who we are. We are foreigners and exiles living in a pagan world. John chapter 17 and verse 16 says, Jesus says, speaking of his disciples, they are not of this world, even as I am not of it. As you sent me into this world, I have sent them into the world. So Jesus says, I'm not of this world, and you aren't of this world either. I have sent you to be in this world, but you are really not of this world. Philippians chapter 3 and verse 20. Our citizenship is in a different place. Our citizenship is in heaven. And so Paul would say, I think very clearly in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So whatever you think of the accommodations in this world, we have to realize if we complain about the food, if we complain about the fellow travelers, if we complain about our lodgings and our place in this world, we have to realize this is not our home. We are just passing through. I live in Coronado, one of the really beautiful spots in America's finest city. And we live in a nice home in Coronado, but that's the Motel 6. We're living in the Motel 6 right now compared to the world that we're supposed to be living in. And so that's, again, a fact that we have to face, is that we are not to be attached to this world, but we are to understand everything about this world as a just passing through. We are just moving through. We are pilgrims. We're aliens. We're exiles. We're not of this world. So we cannot get so attached because we are supposed to be attached somewhere else. So begin to think of your home as your Motel 6. Begin to think of your neighbors and friends, if they are, as pagans. Begin to think of the food, as wonderful as it is, as nothing compared to the accommodations you will have, because we are not of this world. We are just passing through. So, those are the two facts we have to face. God's people have long lived in foreign lands and had to learn to sing his song. And God's people are just passing through. We are aliens and exiles. We are not attached to this world, much as we often become attached. We're not to be attached to this world. So if Psalm 137 is the question, how can we sing the Lord's song in the foreign land? I want us to look at 1 Peter chapter 2 for the answer. If there are two facts we must face, 1 Peter chapter 2 tells us there are two things we must do if we are to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. Two facts we must face, now two things we must do. The first thing Peter says we must do is to live good lives. That's his most important point. That's the most important thing we must do to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that they may see your good deeds and glorify God. How about that? The pagans may not understand our sermons. They may not understand or appreciate our doctrine. They might not like our churches or even understand them, but they can see whether our lives are different, whether our lives are being lived with quality and value. And so Peter says, if you're living among pagans, which we are, then the first and most important thing we need to do is to live good lives so that the pagans will see our good deeds, which may eventually point to our God who is in heaven. I believe I've told you before, and she won't appreciate my telling you again, about my wife getting a call years ago from someone she had worked with here in San Diego in our younger days at a very secular place. She worked in a big ad agency in downtown San Diego. And this young man had moved on from there, as we had, and he called out of the blue. He called our house, had tracked us down, and he said his life was a bit of a mess, and he remembered that she seemed to have a good life. He tried to think about people he knew that seemed to be living a good life, and he thought of her. And so he called up out of the blue, and he said, I want to know more. And so we had a Bible study with him, and he came to Christ and is still a strong and committed Christian, not because of any sermon that he heard, not because of any doctrine that he had been taught, but because he had been around someone who lived in the way that Peter said, live good lives among the pagans so that they may see your good deeds. They may see the quality of your life and therefore be led to the God who is in heaven. So Peter says, this is how you sing the Lord's song in a foreign land, by the way that you live. Let others see your good deeds and glorify God. The second thing Peter says we must do, I don't like quite as well. And that is submit yourselves to authority. And here, I mean, one of the reasons we preachers kind of have to preach expository sermons, we just preach what's in the scripture. I probably wouldn't choose this theme because it's a hard one for me, but we have to preach what it says. And so Peter says in 1 Peter 2 and verses 13 to 17, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, and honor the emperor. But we're Americans, we say. We have rights. But first and foremost, we are citizens of heaven. We are children of God, and God says we're to live modestly and obediently wherever we find ourselves. In Egypt for 430 years, with the Babylonians for 70 years, under the Roman rule, can't get much worse than that, for 150 years, both the time of Jesus and the early church. We are to live obediently. But we don't like this particular emperor or that governor. I'm sure some of you might have said something like that, and maybe even in the last week, that we don't like all of our emperors and governors. Fine. But according to Peter, we owe them our obedience. We owe them our submission. He even says our respect and honor. Oh, that can be difficult. But Peter says that's going to make us stand apart in this foreign land in which we now live. And so one of the things we say in the Church of Christ is we're trying to be like the early church. Well, this is what Peter says the early church needed to be like. The early church needed to accept that they were living under unpleasant, unfair, unappreciated, unwelcome Roman rule. And what should they do? They should honor and respect the emperor. As Jesus said, living in that world himself, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. He said, you should render to Caesar that which is Caesar. You should pay Caesar your taxes, no matter how you feel about Caesar. If you remember when Peter took up his sword and cut the ear of the servant of the high priest who was arresting Jesus, Jesus said, don't you think I could call down 12 legions of angels against this sort of thing? But that's not my point. That's not why I'm here, to win some kind of political war against the emperor, against the Romans, against the high priests, against the unfairness. That's not what I'm about. And so we're called upon to submit to authority and go about our business day by day. So it's really hard, I think, to see this sometimes, but we are on a different road trip than others. We are marching to Zion. This is the song that occurred to me this week when I was working on this from my old school classic hymns day. We are marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. That's the road trip we're on. Zion, by the way, was the mountain where God's temple was built. It was the high mark, the high level of that countryside, and that's where the temple was built. And it became an expression for more than just the temple. It became kind of an expression that captured God's city, God's eternal kingdom. And we're marching to Zion. And that's the Lord's song that we have to keep singing. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Well, that's the song that we should be singing. We're marching to Zion, because that puts our lives in a whole different perspective. That's our road trip. We're taking the high road. Unfortunately, that's not a road where there's a lot of traffic in our world today. Not a lot of people are taking the high road. We're taking the high road and marching to Zion. The accommodations along the way may not be great. We don't worry about that because we're heading for a great home. We have to learn not to listen to all of the chatter. And that's what this is. Not to get so caught up in the cares of this world. Not to become so attached to the cares and concerns of this world. And frankly, I've been working on that in my retirement age. They say that it's very important for seniors to have a sense of optimism. I've learned that I can't read the news and feel very optimistic. And so I've actually begun changing the way that I read the news. And I just skim through it very, very quickly. And I maybe click through to 3 stories, if that, in the course of a day. So I'm aware of what's going on, but I'm trying not to get attached to it. And I'm really working hard on that. And I think it is helping my attitude. As I told one of my former students who kept sending me articles about psychology, I said, just read the sports page. Everything you need to know about life is on the sports page. So I spend more time on ESPN and less on the news sites. Because as we go through this world, and I love this quotation, I don't know that I put it up on the slide or not. I can't see it from here. I love this quotation. It's the set of the sail and not the gale that determines the course. Think about that. It's the set of the sail and not the gale that determines the course. You can sail through any kind of weather. You can sail through any kind of wind, but it all depends on how you set the sail of your life, because it's the set of your sail and not the storms or the winds or the conditions that really determine your course. And so I think that's what we're looking at here, is to reorient our sail and to realize that we are not controlled by the cares of this world, but we are setting our sail towards something different. Acts chapter 2 records the early church, of course, and in particular, it describes the day of Pentecost, when people from all different countries, and in fact, Luke in Acts chapter 2 starts naming all the different countries, so you be sure to know how many different people were there. But Jerusalem was full of people from all different countries who had come together as Jews for the day of Pentecost from all over the world, all in a foreign land. So what did they do? I think this is really a good map for our road trip. Luke says in Acts chapter 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Isn't that a wonderfully simple, straightforward navigational aid for our road trip? They're in a foreign land, they're jammed together, but this is what they devoted themselves to. The apostles' teaching, even if they think they know, they devote themselves to the apostles' teaching. They devote themselves to fellowship, coming together with their fellow believers. They devoted themselves to the breaking of bread, as we did this morning, and to prayer. Those are our marching orders for our road trip. That's our travel itinerary. That's our navigational aid, because we're marching to fairer worlds on high, the beautiful city of God. And so what do we do when we're in the foreign land? Well, we sing. That's what we do. We sing the Lord's song by the lives that we lead, by respecting those in authority as we march to Zion.